Mic check, 1, 2.
Tom, use your word.
Hey, you.
That's original freedom.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's version of the Original Freedom Podcast. Sitting here with Tom Spooner, I'm Nate Horgan. Scott is off on the West Coast this week. And this week we're just going to kind of go through and talk about a little bit of a motivational piece. Kind of going into, some of the path that Tom has walked here and in his military career and as a career itself is something that is truly relatable to anyone that's within the military, out of the military, and kind of looking at his path, the things that he's done along the way, and really what pushed him to get to those levels. And really not much build up or set up to that. But yeah, I mean, really it's something that like kind of overarching is like, speaking for Tom, hopefully I can do it accurately enough, but starting out in infantry, but then also going on to paratrooper, going on to Green Beret, Special Forces, going through Ranger School, and then also going up into Delta Force. So and then as an operator and spending a lot of time there, you've kind of put it simply just saying that like that all kind of started as just like kind of a kid with a dream or a passion that you wanted to go and be in the military, right?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, because that was whenever it comes to dreams and passions, that kind of stuff, in order to be like really successful at it, you kind of have to be good at it too. Like my example for that is I loved football. I loved it. It was passion, everything in my life. Skill set wise, I wasn't that's not something, I wasn't going to end up in the NFL, or at college playing or anything. So for me it was like you had mentioned, it's just a childhood dream and passion of being in the military. And then the piece that I added to it, the influencers of that was my grandfather, and that was a World War II vet, and then my uncle, who was a Vietnam vet. That was a piece of it, but then the rest of it was just kind of inside of me. Like that's what I wanted to do and give it a shot. So I had this big dream. My initial big dream in the military was joining the military and being a ranger. Period. That's as far as my dream went, as far as a kid's dream. Attempted to go to college there for a little while because I was basically just fulfilling what my grandfather and uncle wanted me to do, and it wasn't for me. So I joined whenever I was 20, and and again the big goals was to join the military and then and become a ranger. Yeah. So the big thing about dreams is that, hey, you got an end goal, or I have an end goal in mind, but sometimes the route that I'm choosing to get to them doesn't always present itself as the same. What I mean by that is I joined the military and with the hopes of going to Ranger Battalion, and through my 11 X-ray contract, which meant I was unassigned to where I was going, I ended up becoming 11 Hotel, which 11 Hotel is tow missile gunner. And oh, by the way, they don't need those at Ranger Battalion. So I finished up basic training and immediately, was derailed off of that track in my mind of like, hey, I was going to go basic AIT, jump school, and then I was going to go to Ranger Assessment Selection.
What was that initial, like, how did you handle that as far as like finding out that that's something that like right off the bat?
I was pretty furious.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, because I didn't really understand all the different aspects of what it meant to be 11 X-ray at the time when I joined the military. It was another reason it helped me get out of probation early. So, and I knew it's what I wanted to do, and I just needed to be going like now. So the recruiter got me good, and but yeah, whenever I found out, finished basic, that plan, I was in the vein of like executing my dream. I was one step after the other. Finished basic, then we got into AIT, and they mentioned the tow missile gunner piece, and then they said, well, no, you can't go to Ranger selection after that. And I'm like, I was furious, man. I was like, what in the what am I going to do? The only thing that kind of kept me in line at that time was the Gulf War had just kicked off. You know what I mean? So that was kind of, other than just kind of school and peacetime military oriented, it was like, hey, there was a war there going on now, so it was like, okay, so that obviously occupied and helped. I was still pretty furious about not going down that route, but then it was like, okay, hey, you're going to go to the 82nd and then go to the Gulf. So that kind of, again, many different paths to get to where I wanted to go. And so went to the Gulf, came back from that, and then I was still on my plight to get to Rangers. I was like, man, I got to do it. And it was awesome though where I was. And I've always been fortunate in the military of just having these incredible warriors around me. Like my platoon sergeant was a Vietnam vet. It was in 91, so there was still a lot of Vietnam vets on active duty, and we had several of them. So I was just super fortunate. But I was still on this path of, I'm going to be a Ranger, and so I couldn't go to Ranger Battalion. So, hey, the next thing was Ranger School. So I fought my way into jumping the line, per se, as far as getting to Ranger School. So in most places, other than Ranger Regiment, in order to go to Ranger School in that time, you had to be a Spec 4, which usually meant you had to have 2 years in the Army, before you'd be promoted to specialist. Guys in Ranger Regiment can go as a PFC. Well, I was a PFC, and so I went to pre-Ranger, got selected. They're like, hey, yep, he's good to go, ready to go to Ranger School. And then they found out I was a specialist. But that was all part of my platoon sergeant's design. He's like, hey, you don't worry about it. You just go and do work, show up, graduate. I'll take care of the rest. And so they were getting ready to lose a slot. They were like, division is going to lose its 5 slots that it gets a year for Ranger School, or they had to promote me, which is all my platoon sergeant's plan, and so they had to promote me, so I went to Ranger School. So I went to Ranger School in February of '92, and I did the extended stay there. I did I recycled mountains, and so I ended up graduating like May time frame. So it was had a little bit of extended, but at the time too, I'd only had a year and a half in the Army.
Wow.
So that was pretty good. I got recycled because I earned it, by the way. You know what I mean? Failed patrols.
Is that something that I could be messing this up, but is it something that it's like it's built in that like you're going to fail or something like that I'd heard, or no?
No, man, it's super hard. It's super hard. I mean,
yeah.
a lot of guys recycle. You know what I mean? Because how hard it is. And I mean, there's a good amount that make it straight through. I'm not sure what the percentages are, but I would say minimum 50%, if not more, have some sort of recycle during that phase.
Gotcha. And so even going back to like, what was it about that? And obviously you're the researcher. You love digging into things. Like
right.
What? So I would assume that at that time, going into it, you had known so much about what that meant to be a Ranger going in, right? I mean,
yep.
So what was it about that above all was like, I want to go do that?
Yeah, so for me, it's always been, I always love to be challenged. I mainly on that, like we were talking about, a 60% physical, 40% intellectual, and but I just always had this thing inside of me of, hey, do I have what it takes to be a part of something that is coveted? You know what I mean? Something that's really, really hard to get. You know what I mean? That was always has always been a big driver for me. But specifically then, it was like, I mean, there was some ego in there too. You know what I mean? You get your nice Ranger tab on that piece. So, you know what I mean? It's like now the whole world, because in the military, everything is on your uniform. So the more stuff you have on the uniform, the more people know. And so having that, you know what I mean, as a specialist in the 82nd was huge street cred. But internally it was all about the challenge. You know what I mean? And do I have what it takes to be there?
Gotcha. And so what was that what was the stretch then from there? I mean, now that you had even said it, you'd graduated from it a year
Yeah.
and a half in. There's another, 19 and a half years to your career.
Right.
And even for me, that was a surprise. I didn't know going into this that came that early. Like,
Yeah.
what was it after that? Because you obviously went on to do a ton of other things and graduate from a bunch of other schools and selections
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So you had, reached your childhood dream.
Yep.
And now what? I mean,
Yeah. So I did, I got that. And then the thing was, and I loved being in the military, back to the childhood kind of passions of, hey, in order for it to become a reality, you have to have the skill set for it, and so I had the skill set for what was needed in the military, as far as physicality, as far as intelligence, all of that aspect of it. So I realized immediately, that this is a vein, this is a job set, that I can stay in and be very successful. And so once I got that Ranger tab, especially in the 82nd in 1992, again, it was after the Gulf, so now it was a big stretch of peacetime. It was, I'd knocked out the hardest school that you could go to, in the 82nd there. So I'd already knocked that off, so the world just opened up for me. So I was this golden boy, so I went to Pathfinder school, Jump Master school, Air Assault school, like every school. Because I proved I could pass the hardest one, then the other ones just came to me. Like, hey man, this guy's a go-getter, let's give it to him. And so I ate it all up. Spent 5 years there in the 82nd. And again, working with just incredible warrior leadership, that I had there. And it was very fulfilling to me. You know what I mean? I was moving up in the ranks. I was going to all these different schools. I was just, hey, what's the next thing I can do? Because it's all about, hey, if I'm going to be something, whatever that something is, like in this case, hey, how can I be the best soldier in the 82nd that I could be? Well, it means you go to this school, that school, this school, that school, achieve this rank, go to these, there's a whole list of things that if you want to max out that job position, this is what you need to do. So I just ran from one of those things to the next. And again, I was there 5 years, so I had a large amount of time just really learning what it meant to be a young leader, what it meant to motivate, folks, take care of folks, So I learned all of that stuff at in those, it took me 5 years, and then at the end of that 5 years, like you said, it's kind of like, okay, I've maxed everything out here, given back also. So it wasn't like I knocked all that out in 3 years and then I left, so I spent the 5 years there because I'm big on loyalty too, as far as giving back when possible. But then I got to the end of the run there and there was nothing else to tackle, and I loved being there and stuff. And but it was just kind of, also I always talk about, I was an entrepreneur even in the military. It was like, okay, hey, what's the next challenge? Again, my childhood dream was this Ranger piece, and I'd already at least went to the school. I hadn't went to the battalion or anything, but I went to the school and it was like, okay, now what's the next hardest thing for me to do? And it was special forces. But it was never a dream, again, my dream was just kind of to max this thing out. So it was like, okay, hey, that's the next step. If I don't make it there, I'll probably get out or something. I didn't really have a big, huge plan. And but the last thing that I finished up with doing in the 82nd was they have a Best Ranger competition. And I was survivor, not a competitor. I claimed my 13th place honorably.
Well, as I hear, that is a pretty long-awaited competition.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it was tough. And most people, that win it or are very successful at it, they've done it a few times because you have no idea exactly. Like something's going to be hard, but until you have the context of doing it, then you're like, oh my god, this is. So, but I got to do that. That was a huge, accolade, kind of something to be very proud of. At my 13th position, I'm very proud of.
Out of how many though?
I don't remember. I think it was like 100 dudes started.
It was that many.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was that.
It was that many. So
yeah.
it is respectable.
So getting done with that, that's when it was like, okay, hey, I knew I wanted to stay in the military, but I knew I just couldn't stay where I was. And
Mm-hmm.
again, and that was just something inside of me, not because the place sucked or, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this sucked. It was like, no, man, it's all perfect. I just I needed to do more. And so then I went to selection. I was 25 whenever I went there.
And just from hanging with you guys, I, I have some understanding that that's a pretty big difference as far as like special forces to 82nd. I mean, that
Yeah,
jump,
the
that's kind
jump
of a
in between.
difference in cultures, right? As far as like
Absolutely.
what is entailed and kind of the makeup of the person, right? So,
Yeah, so and then yeah, because in the conventional army, everything is just like it says, conventional.
hmm
Everything is very structured, the rank structure, the levels of responsibility with each rank, all appropriately. And but it was not a lot of freedom to maneuver,
hmm
to grow, expand, that kind of deal, and to be responsible, because that was always the thing with me. I always wanted more responsibility. Again, it goes back to being tested.
hmm
It goes like, hey, do I have what it takes? And so whenever I did cross over there and went to special forces, just like you were saying, I mean, it is a cultural difference, because again, it's more senior folks. I mean, it's more uh, intellectually driven. It's more individual initiative driven, so it's a lot more responsibility.
Gotcha. It being that different of a kind of a shift,
Uh-huh.
um, was it the type of deal like where, I mean, you kind of talked about the types of things you're able to do before going to selection. Like, with it being kind of a different world, what was it like going from, like, as you put it, golden boy to now kind of where you got
Nobody.
like low guy on the totem
Yeah,
pole
you're
here at this
nobody.
point?
You're a new guy.
Gotcha. So what
Yeah.
was that like?
Yeah, so that was the experience, like you said, coming from the top of the food chain, you know what I mean, in conventional army, like, whoa, this guy's awesome. Just look at his uniform, and then roll over to special forces, where that's where the cultural change is different. It was like, hey, nobody really cares what you have on your uniform. Like, hey, how do you work? You know what I mean? A kind of deal. So, and like you said, the restart, like, hey, you're back to being a new guy and stuff. So there was a little bit of a culture shock in there for me, but but I was super motivated about it. But one of the big things, big life lessons for me whenever I got to special forces was I was still, I mean, I wasn't really young like Scott was whenever
hmm
he got there. I mean, I was 26 years old whenever I showed up to a team there in 7th Special Forces Group. And I was arrogant. I was young and again very successful and everything, and I was just like, big, pretty physical stud dude. And whenever I got to my team, it was a bunch of older guys. I mean, the senior guys. I mean, they've been in SF for a long time. And again, me just being fortunate. 3 of the guys on my team were veterans of like the war in El Salvador. In Honduras and stuff. So again, seasoned, combat veterans ahead of me. But me being arrogant and everything, some of them were a little bit overweight. You know what I mean? Kind of. But again, I had no context. Like, hey, to be in SF for 10 years, the toll that it takes on your body and everything. I was just, so I was a little bit arrogant, and I was like, man, I'm not sure if this is where I want to be. You know what I mean? Everybody's not as motivated, just arrogant. And then, lucky for me, I had enough emotional maturity to stop myself. And be like, hang on a second, man. Like, I'm an 18 Charlie, an explosive guy. It's like, just got here, been there about a year or something. Because I was already thinking of like, well, what's the next thing? I don't really like it here. And it's like, man, I haven't even been here long enough. Shut up. Like, why don't you learn how to do your job? And so I did. And then those guys, thank God I never said it out loud. The guys that I was judging about maybe a little overweight or, hey, not very motivated, kind of
hmm
time for them to move on or whatever, right? Is then we went downrange, meaning like we went to Colombia,
hmm
or we went to Ecuador, wherever we would go. And then I saw these guys that I had judged as being less than appropriate. You know, I watched them just do wizardry. You know what I mean? As far as their language abilities, to understanding cultures and to do what a true special forces soldier can do, which is, train, equip, motivate, host nation folks. Me, I'm just this white dude that barely speaks Spanish and can, you know, bench press a lot. You know what I mean? And can shoot good. Well, that's of no value to an SF team in South America. So it was really, back to being the new guy of like, whoa. And so I, like, again, thank God for a little bit of emotional maturity. I was like, let me learn this job. And I did that for the next 6 years. And the big challenges for me, again, back to being challenged, was the job itself. You know what I mean? Going into all these different places in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, in Colombia, in Honduras, Venezuela, all these other places, and really learning my job, working in embassies, like doing that was, again, I'm a guy that gets bored pretty easily, so I got to have a lot going on around me, significantly a lot, and so there it was just like, wow. I have to learn this language. I have to learn this job. I have to learn this other culture. I have to learn all these different skill sets. So for 6 years, there wasn't a lot of schools left for me to go to. When I was there, maybe went to a couple, but it was all just about the team time and learning how to do the job. And by the time, I left there, it was, I definitely had that down. I did almost 6 years of team time there, and it was really, really good.
Awesome. So, and you reach that point again where it's like, kind of what's next.
Yeah.
And so, I guess I would frame it. What are your options at that point as far as what's next?
So
in your case,
yeah,
it's to
in my
challenge
case,
yourself.
the options that I had were, I was getting ready to be. I was already a senior sergeant first class, E7. I was getting ready to be an assistant team leader. And then once I made my 8 within a couple years, and I'd be a team sergeant, so I could, ride that time out and become a team sergeant. That was one option. The other option was, because I never wanted to be an instructor, and I never wanted to be a drill sergeant. I never wanted to do anything other than be operational. So that was never, I always avoided that at all costs, which some people hate me for it, but I don't really care. It's like, yeah, I'm just doing me.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that, so I could do that, be a team sergeant. I could go to warrant officer to get more team time. Those are pretty much the main options I was looking at, or I could go to Delta selection. And you know what I mean? And that was always like, man, there's no way I can make it out there. You know what I mean? Just in my own self-evaluation and everything, it's like, I don't think I can make it out there. But then something that I've always used, like we've talked about, is like in my decision-making processes about my life, I ask myself, it's like, hey, if I don't go give this, Delta selection a shot, will I regret it? Because I heard a lot of guys, say like, that were older guys in SF, like, man, I wish I'd have gave it a shot. Some of them, you know what I mean? But I was like, okay, but I knew that if I didn't give it a shot, I would regret it. And again, I was kind of an older guy in the military at that time. It was 2001, so I had almost 11 years in the military, senior E7, well established, you know what I mean? And the other aspect was like, yeah, go out and start as a new guy again, out there. But my driving factor of going to there was just like, hey, I knew that if I didn't try it, I would regret that as a life decision, So I didn't want that, you know what I mean? Don't want regrets in life when we don't have to have them. And yeah, so I was like, well, that's definitely a challenge. You know what I mean? And that's the, as far as in the Army goes, that's the top of the food chain. You know what I mean? That is, it doesn't get any higher.
Yeah, and so that's crazy that many times you've had to kind of restart.
Yeah.
Kind of not necessarily kind of repurpose yourself or kind of your goal or what you're trying to get. I think it's cool because, a lot of us, it's almost easy to say like, yeah, I'm just going to go into it. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, essentially, how you talked about it before is that like, yeah, I didn't totally think that I would even make it. I was just
No.
gonna go see what happened.
Yeah, I wouldn't have bet on me. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously, I wanted to do it and believed there was a possibility that I could make it,
Hmm.
but I wouldn't have bet money on me. You know what I mean? As far as on that aspect.
So that being said, you go through the process. You're selected. I mean, what's the feeling of accomplishment at that point? Is it like, is
It
it more
was
surprise that it didn't sink in, or it's like,
no, it was
now I'm
it
here?
was it was really again it was really huge because I didn't know anything. You know, what I mean about Delta, and
Mhm.
what it all meant, and so I didn't know anybody that was out there. I didn't, you know what I'm saying? It was just like this huge mysterious thing, this place that I
Even
had.
for guys in the army, which to me is
Oh yeah,
surprising,
well
because
man, and being on Fort Bragg, I mean, I had ran and road marched around that compound for 11 years, and had no idea what was going on in there, but I knew I really would like to know.
find out.
Yeah, exactly. So like to your point is like, yeah, man, huge. It was pretty overwhelming, as far as like making that, of getting selected. You know what I mean? And that just gets your foot in the door, and then you got 6 months of training on or about 6 months of training, which was every day. So I really loved that bit of like success, like oh my god, I made it, which was huge. Little did I know that like, hey man, I just got my toe in the door.
Right.
You know what I mean? The real test was to come, and that was, the 6 months of, training and stuff where the axe is over your head like every day. So I've always looked for a challenge, and yeah, I got it. And then, but then going through and making it with that, and actually like when you finally make it, at the end of selection, at the end of the training, and hey, you're actually going to work. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Operationally, that's whenever it really sets in as far as like, holy cow, can't believe I made it. You know what I mean? Like, wow, what an accomplishment kind of
Mhm.
deal. Super proud, like, wow, what to do. And then you restart at the bottom again.
Mhm.
you know? And that's but again, that's why that place was just exactly where I needed to be.
Mhm.
Because then from that every day forward, it was about, I mean, you're working with the best of the best athletes, the best shooters, the best thinkers, problem solvers, in the military, and I would venture to say in the world. And some days you're at the top of the pile, and other days you're just trying to keep up. Well, I was anyway, and so it was a consistent challenge, what I mean, throughout my whole time, being there.
And so I mean, just however, what, and not because I know this is going to be uncomfortable for you, but as far as like just trying to put into perspective for everyone, just as far as how high and kind of rare of a pinnacle that achievement is, as far as like how rare, or even just how elite is that?
Yeah, the chances, I mean, just to put it into perspective, for the audiences, the chances of that dream happening and coming true and being there and working would be like little Johnny, you know, playing high school football,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be in the NFL. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm going to be, out of all the hundreds of thousands of folks that have that opportunity, the chance of them actually pulling that dream off and being successful there, not for a long piece, but you know
Right,
what I
right,
mean?
right.
But like actually having a successful career there, I mean, those numbers are huge.
So, and along the way, what are some times that, I mean, were there at any point where you just like, was it ever in doubt that whatever you were working towards was going to come to fruition? Was there ever a doubt? Did you, I mean, what kind of
Always a doubt.
adversity like did you face, even not necessarily like, in aspiring for that next
Uh-huh.
step?
Yeah, man. The big things for me was that there was always doubt. Like I wasn't the guy that had these positive self affirmations and those kind of
Hmm.
those kind of things. It was all just total. It always a lot of things come back to two different aspects that are free. You know what I mean? And that's attitude and work ethic. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, Your free will, is what governs your attitude in any given situation. And then like the whole thing, man, it's like, hey, you might do a lot of things, but you won't outwork me.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, and that's across every field. Professional. Those that make it at the professional level of anything. Is that so for me it was always big just keeping my eye on the prize, of like, hey, identifying the dreams that I wanted to go through. I mean, the things, because that's that whole deal of like dreams without goals are just dreams, is like
The
that.
tactics behind it.
Yeah, man, you like, hey, you have to put action, effort, and attitude, towards that goal, especially when it's one as big as that. It's there's a lot that goes into it, but if I would have to say my number one struggle the whole time was self-doubt,
Hmm.
which is funny, right? Because what the end result of all those schools, of all of those accomplishments, is someone that's externally people would look at and go like, "Oh, that guy's got to have the most confidence in the whole world." You know what I mean? And it's like, and I did on one hand, that's what I displayed and that's what I was. I mean, I was confident a lot of the time, but I always had that kind of self-doubt. But I always learned, I don't know if I was taught it or just learned on my own, is like, I use that self-doubt for fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I stay in that self-doubt too much, then I'll make it come true, as far as like I'll fail.
Mm-hmm.
But if I take that self-doubt and just use it as fuel to make me work even that much more, then it's taking that negative aspect that I have going on me and turning it into a positive.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to hear you kind of go through that. And like, I think it's commonly used, that people would talk about that you yourself is your hardest critic. And I think that's true for a good number of people. I know
Yeah.
for myself, and it sounds like for you too, it's that way. But also that like you could be your biggest doubter,
Oh
and
yeah.
that like your driver is literally just to prove yourself, or even that little voice in your
Yeah.
head, wrong. Like even to
Absolutely.
prove to yourself that you can do it, and that's
Yeah,
pretty cool.
man. And the other thing too, man, is that as far as big lessons along the way, because we hear it all the time in media and stuff. They're like, hey, fail fast,
Hmm.
fail forward, like that kind of stuff. Like, hey, I get what they're saying, but just the same thing in different words is that if you're gonna fail fast, you better learn how to recover fast. You know what I'm saying? Because like failing forward, all that stuff, that all that stuff briefs well, but really where the money is made, not literally, but I mean, well, literally and figuratively, is how quick do I recover from the failure or from the perceived failure? It's like because I'll never forget, you know what I mean, at the end of all that training out at the unit, is like have a have a little talk to you there at the end and say, hey, what was the number one thing you learned? And it was like, yeah, how to recover fast. because because out there, is like in most things in life, if you fail, you get time to think about it. Maybe you get time to do some retraining on it, retooling, what I mean, hey, get your shit together and then attack it again. No. You know what I mean? It's like within seconds. Ultimate failure, you're about to get fired. If you ever do that again, ready? We're going again. Like, so, I mean, like having to, because people always say, like, I mean, that's a learned skill set as far as like, hey, let the past be in the past. You know what I mean? Like, hey, don't worry about your last play, the last round fired, whatever it is. Focus on what's in front of you. That's easy said. You know what I mean? And it's like, hey, how do I do that? You know what I mean? Consciously, you know what I mean? How do I do it? But to being able to recover quick and getting right back into the fight, whatever that is like, that is, if there's something, if there's a skill that I would recommend people to work on, me and myself, is that, I mean, it's like, hey, failure's part of it, especially when you're going for it in life, at being a dad, at being a husband, at being a professional, whatever it is. It's like, hey, failure's going to happen. Um, what happens whenever I fail, and the answer has got to be recover quick.
That's what I loved most about just in my background from sports of just playing them. I mean, don't get me wrong, I had plenty of time in sports where I would dwell on things that happened in the past and had to actually like quit sports because of that. But like I'm a firm believer that my life changed when I really dove into football and got, the opportunity to play at the college level with people that undoubtedly, I mean, the majority of times were way more athletic,
Right.
stronger, faster, whatever. And just, I often think about like how would I view things if I didn't get the opportunity to actually get knocked on my ass, literally,
Right.
and have the choice of like stay there or get back up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just because I myself think of attacking things in that way as well, of like just not necessarily failing fast. No one wants to fail,
Right.
but it's the how you're getting back up and how you're putting that aside because there's something coming next.
Yeah, man.
And that's I'm in lockstep with you on that.
Yeah, because life happens so fast.
Hmm.
I mean, just everyday life. I mean, tragedies occur to everyone at any given time. You know what I mean? All of those, not even just tragedies. I mean, that happens, but changes in life. You know what I mean? All kinds of stuff. It's like, hey, how can I, if I'm so fixed, it's kind of like a dichotomy or something. It's like when someone, hey, you got to be fixed, solid on the goal, especially when it's a big one, to go after it. But what do you do when it gets shifted up? How do you still keep your eyes on the prize? You know what I mean, and keep working for it after you've been knocked on your ass, like you said, maybe literally or figuratively. How am I going to do that? So what was it that drove you, like, to get up
Well,
and
it's
keep
weird.
going?
It's weird that um, that you kind of have gone through your ultimate driver of regret, and I think that was always mine. When I always, my career wanting to work in the NFL in front office,
Right.
and even when I was younger, trying to play college sports, it was just something that like if I don't try it now, and I know that the time on my window on that
Yeah.
is shutting, then I if I'm forced to live with the regret of never knowing if
Yeah.
I would have been able to do that. That was absolutely my driver to just essentially go out and try it. And then when it works out, is just seeing it through to the only way that I know how to do things, of finishing them, or essentially not wanting to live with the regret of giving up on that.
Oh yeah.
Now, I don't want to, because I think a lot of the things that we talk about as far as giving up on things, it's. I think while you still have the heart for it, while you still have the desire for that,
Yeah.
we've talked about it previously of like sacrifice. As long as the love is there to do that, be there in that job with that person, then to me it's worth doing.
Yeah.
Now, when that falls out, I don't want to, seem contradictory, but essentially, yeah, um, that was just my driver of just wanting to do something that I loved and not ever calling it quits before I fully realized that option or that
Yeah.
job or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, man. And a lot of times we talk about as a lot of times in life, the big decisions, are usually between bad and worse,
Hmm.
right? Because between good and bad, that's not really a decision. I mean, I'm going to go for whatever the good choice is. There's not really a decision-making process in
Hmm.
that. But when I have a decision that's between bad and worse, now I need to reflect on that a minute. And just based off what you said, what I said is like the big things that I know that was helpful to us was that, because everybody has the fear of failure, right? I mean, that's a common fear that everybody has. It's like, you have a fear of failure. But what's worse, the fear of failure or, that sting of regret?
Hmm.
And for those of us that have had regret in our lives, we know that, hey, that sting of regret, of life decision regret far outweighs the fear of failure. It doesn't mean the fear of failure doesn't go away, because that's always kind of there. Anybody worth their salt doesn't want to fail,
Hmm.
I mean, but it's like we balance it out with, it's like, hey, that's the lesser of the evils,
Hmm.
man. I'll embrace that fear of potentially failing versus at the end of my life, of saying, like, man, I really regret not trying this or trying that. And what enabled me to not try it was that fear of failure,
Yeah.
you know.
And to even round out kind of the conversation today, um, kind of getting away from somewhat extreme examples of like sports and military, but for me, my priorities shifted to where the possible regret and fear of regret for me kind of shifted when my priorities went more towards wanting to have a family,
Right.
wanting to have a house, wanting to have time with, and so whereas as much of what can be perceived of what we're talking about today is working the long nights or, spending all the time doing this, like I know I was doing those things and my dream, my aspiration had shifted.
Right.
And so like for me, it seemed like the white picket fence scenario was what I wanted. So then
Right.
I had now shifted all of my energy towards I don't want to look back and miss time of that because
Right.
that's truly at this point what I want,
Yeah.
as opposed to the things in career that I had before and what I was doing, and just being true to myself in that, and trying to kind of bring it to those out there that maybe not have the experience and those examples that we used earlier. What are ways that you kind of take that mentality of looking back, not wanting to have said that I tried that? How do you incorporate that into your today, now
Y-
being retired from the
Yeah.
military?
So after getting out in 2011, I'd spent my whole life with that kind of modus operandi. You know what I mean? Of like that way of my culture of moving through life. So there's obviously huge shift, like you mentioned, the shift from playing ball and kind of very self-centered,
Hmm.
not in a bad way, but in a self-centered way, to now your self got much bigger because you had
Right.
other people in it, and so it was a huge shift. I mean, almost a 180. It's the same with me of getting out. It was like, hey, I'm out of the military now. I'm private. Like, so, hey, what are the priorities? Well, I just took who I was in the military and all that principally, and applied it into my life outside of the military. Again, like, hey, what are my priorities? What are the things that I'm living for now? Which is, hey, I'm going to be the best husband and the best father that I can be. Okay, well, shooting a gun doesn't involve that. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Having all this skill set, you know what I mean? So I found myself back to the new guy again. You
Uh-huh.
know what I mean? Or you know what I'm saying as far as newer guy,
Hmm.
like, man, what schools can I go to? Again, that same thing. What kind of training? Now that I have these new goals, that is very family oriented and also veteran, helping oriented and like our nation and stuff. It's like, hey, how do I take those same things and I do it the same way to your point of like, hey, yeah, what are the goals? Like, hey, what are the dreams? What are the goals that I'd like to accomplish? Hey, yeah, I want to be the man. You know what I mean? Provide for my family. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. That's a laundry list of tasks. You know what I mean? And I fall short on a lot of them. So that means I need retraining and hey, get back into the fight. So that whole thing of that's principles that I've learned just to be able to do it. As and again, identifying the regrets, identifying, hey, what do I not want to lose in my life? And when I identify those things, then then the way ahead is crystal clear for me.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Because if I want to be a good dad, well, then I got to do what good dads do. You
Hmm.
know, and and that's my definition of a
Right.
good dad.
Hmm.
So again, to me, it's always come back to identifying the goals and kind of the dreams and then doing all the work that it takes to fulfill that position and to be in that position. And I'm not really good at learning new stuff, so I just like to take those same principles and apply them to my life today.
Well, it's worked so far, so
Yeah, hey,
we're
so far
doing
so
okay.
good. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, definitely just wrapping up here on the Original Freedom Podcast. Good discussion today about kind of what it has taken, a deeper look into Tom and what he's done and the drivers and the motivations and things that pushed him to go through that and hopefully, um, things that, everyone can take back with them. If there's things that you're thinking about, that it goes essentially down to what you had just said, as far as identifying what you truly want and what is, what is truly your priority and what you want to do, and looking back and seeing, if I'm not doing those things, am I comfortable with looking back and saying that I didn't try to?
Yeah.
And essentially that's what it all has come down to from, again, my experience. I mean, you just talked on that too, and that's essentially all we will talk about is what we personally have experienced. So,
Right.
look for all other Original Freedom content on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on our website at ogfree.com. Thanks for your time today, and we will see you again soon.
That's a wrap.